Welcome to The Third Story. I'm Leo Sidran. Today's conversation features Peter Coyote. Even if you don't know who Peter Coyote is, chances are you know his voice. He's got one of those voices that has become part of the backdrop of American popular culture in the last 20 years. He's narrated countless documentaries. I mean, you could count them. I haven't counted them, but you could count them. But he has narrated a number of the Ken Burns documentary series on PBS, along with quite a few National Geographic documentaries and other popular documentaries the last 2 decades. He's also appeared in many films. He's a film actor. He's worked with everyone from Steven Spielberg to Roman Polanski. He got his start acting on the street in San Francisco in the 1960s. He was a member of the San Francisco Mime Troupe and then the Diggers, which was a kind of an anarchist improvisational street theater scene. He writes about it in 2 of his memoirs. The most recent one is called The Rain Man's Third Cure, and it was published last year. He's also a blues musician and a Zen Buddhist priest. We spoke recently when he was visiting New York. He lives in Marin County outside of San Francisco, and we sat down for an afternoon in an apartment where he was staying, drinking Chinese tea. He travels with his own special Chinese tea, so in the background you can hear him brewing and pouring the tea. And I had just finished his book, The Rain Man's Third Cure. I mean, I'm talking about 10 minutes before I walked into the room to talk to him. So if you want to know what it sounds like to read somebody's memoir and then walk into a room and talk to them, this is what it's like. And you can hear it's a little bit intense. I mean, we went deep and we went there fast. We spoke quite a bit about the importance of meditation and the search for the authentic self. And man, this was some heavy stuff. That's all there is to say about it. He is a serious cat, a totally serious cat. By the way, if you dig what you're hearing, please go to iTunes and leave a review. It seems like a small thing, but it makes a big difference. You know, we are in a podcast revolution right now. This is an audio revolution. There's a lot of content out there for you to hear. I appreciate that you are making this a priority today and listening to it. And if you would like other people to make the same choice, I encourage you to go and leave a review on the iTunes Music Store because it really helps people decide what to listen to. If you want to subscribe, it's third-story.com. You can listen to all of the previous episodes. You can also subscribe to the mailing list or on the iTunes Store directly from the website. You can find me on Twitter at Leo Sidran. You can find me on Facebook, The Third Story Conversations. What else? Mucho Leo, my new record, came out last month. I got you captive here for a minute. Let's talk about it. Now, you know as well as I do that while we are in an audio revolution when it comes to podcasting, we are in the bottom of the decline of the record business. I don't think we can get much lower than this. But if you want to support some nice independent music, check it out. Here it is, my conversation with Peter Coyote.
I feel, particularly today, I feel either like I've just crammed for this conversation because I literally just finished your most recent book, Outside, or like I've been preparing for it for a long time because so much of it resonated with me.
Well, take your pick.
To go from hanging out with Nino Cerruti and Roman Polanski and then the Hells Angels and the Diggers and to come from money and to have it lost, to be rich and to be poor and to be unknown and to be famous all in one lifetime seems like a lot.
Maybe that's why I'm tired.
Well, not all of us will have in our lifetime the kind of exposure to living history in the way that you have, but I'd like to think that there's still some wisdom that you might have for people who want to have a career in the arts or want to have a career that involves some degree of self-expression. Well,
every other role but your authentic self has been taken. So if you don't want to become a wannabe or a second best somebody, you better get in touch with that living stream that's coming over the spinal telephone. And the best way that I know how to do that is through meditating. It allows your ego to have a long leash and to sort of wander out to the hinterlands a little bit. And you just bathe in the vastness of everything. And it's cumulative. You just go there every day. You spend a certain amount of time not expecting anything, just sitting. Not trying to get enlightened, nothing, just sitting. And it's like walking in fog. You get drenched. Mm-hmm. You have to be patient. But the payoff is worth it. And what else is there to do?
I started meditating last year. I'm lucky if I can get 15 or 20 minutes a day.
That's good. But 15 or 20 minutes is fine.
I hear your book opens and you say after a year of 2 40-minute daily sessions, you went on a retreat and suffered enormously.
Oh, yeah, it was a nightmare.
And I thought, oh man, I mean, here I am kind of like trying to eke out, a quarter of an hour.
It gets easier. Well, I mean, so what makes it hard?
I think the discipline of just making the time to do it.
Oh.
Making the time.
Well, if you stake down a time every day, it's like driving a stake in the middle of a stream. The stream will part around it. If you say, I'm going to get up 5:30 and sit for 20 minutes, and you make that pledge and you do it, you won't be going to bars and stay until 1:30 in the morning. So, or you say at the end of every day before I go out, between the end of my day's work and going out, I'm going to sit for 20 minutes and just chill, let the day go off. It will change everything. And it will give you a feeling of like what intention is and how powerful it is and how it can spin the whole world on its axis. Because once you set your intention fixedly, the whole world will spin around you with you as the axis. Mm-hmm. And it's a wig.
There was a kind of a tension for a long time between the authentic self, or what authenticity is, and by doing that, by transforming yourself over and over and over again, looking for more and more opportunities for self-transformation. Towards the end of the book, you start to say, you don't have to do anything, really. Actually, you've been authentic and an authentic person the whole time. That authenticity is happening at all times.
If you're aware of it. The problem is that we meaning virtually the entire human race, are taught this notion that we have a fixed self that doesn't change, that what's out there changes, and that we are this little fixed self. Maybe there's a little acorn, Leo Sidran, Peter Coyote, tucked under our liver or our kidney somewhere. And that idea of a separate self that's separate from the rest of the world makes us feel frail and fragile and at risk, and that we're going to have an end. But an equally true perception is that we're simultaneously have never not been a part of all of it. If you imagine standing on a cliff and looking at a choppy ocean, each little wave coming up to the surface, could be a little person. Well, I'm just a little timid wave. Oh, I'm the biggest wave on the block. I'm a sneaky wave. Whatever. They come up like our lives. They come up, they take shape for a while, and then they disappear. But what they forget is that they've always been part of the ocean. And what we forget is that we've always been part of the ocean. And if you put all your attachment on the visual world, what you can see, well, that's going to disappear, so there's nothing to do but be afraid or, worry about your termination as a particular form. Mm-hmm. But if you put your attention on the part that's you've always been a part of oxygen, of sunlight, of microbes in the soil, of plants, of trees, of pollinating insects, of birds. You've never not for one instant been apart from it. Well, then the question of death is not so clear-cut, And we can't really actually answer the question of who's living. So if we can't answer the question of who's living, we can't find that self. Doesn't have a shape, doesn't have a color, doesn't have a location. If I tried to sell you a car and I said, well, I don't know where it is, don't know what color it is, and I don't know where I left it, you wouldn't have a lot of confidence in it. So the conundrum, the mystery of being alive is that we all have this feeling of a self, of being an isolated integer, like every grain of sand, every leaf, every snowflake, separate, isolated, unique. And we never train ourselves or allow ourselves to see and experience the other side of it. And what meditating does is allow that fixed self to kind of evaporate for certain periods every day. And you get to experience all the separate parts, the cluster that we're actually made of, form, feeling, impulse, sensation, consciousness. Your mind is just churning away and you can watch it without attaching to it. So I think that's when I was seeking multiple transformations. I'm not sure I was seeking multiple transformations, actually. I think I was just pursuing what interested me at the time and what I was thinking about at the time. And until I was maybe in my early 40s, it always seemed to be the hippest thing happening. And then sometime in my 40s, like I fell off the one, I fell off the tip of the spear, and I stopped caring about being at the tip and the hottest, hippest. But, I listened to old blues and I listened to jazz as a kid, and the authenticity of those voices and Appalachian music and all of that led me to wonder, who were those people? What were their lives? That got me into folk music. Folk music took me into the first burgeoning counterculture, where you run into old hipsters and old beatniks and old communists and old lefties, and you get a different view of history. You get new books to read and new conversations. Somebody said once, I thought it was Dylan. Somebody told me it was Gary Snyder, who said, when you found somebody that you could have a good conversation with, you'd drive 1,000 miles.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
I don't think I was actually trying to transform myself, except to the degree that I didn't want to stay a suburban potato all my life.
You talk about the waves jumping up in the water. There's a few other images that you just used of the kind of physical manifestations of what we see. But of course, the stuff that you were interested in, as you alluded to, was some of the, not only the hippest, but sort of the most significant cultural stuff happening in the second half of the 20th century. I mean, just walking down the kind of evolution is like a lesson in American popular culture in the second half of the 20th century. It seems pretty astounding. Did you, at a certain point, look at the kind of access and the kinds of people that you were drawn to and were becoming, and think, boy, this is really unusual, or this is something that in the future other people would be interested in hearing about?
No, never. It's like if I had anything that I could stay with certainty, it was just that I was faithful to what I was thinking about, and that I just honored it. And I'd had the crap kicked out of me as a kid, and there were a lot of things that other people could do that I couldn't do. I couldn't play sports. I didn't like competition. I hated losing, and if winning was going to make somebody else feel as bad as I felt losing, I didn't want to win either. So I just opted out of a whole cultural side of America. So I lost a lot because of that. I didn't understand that when I made those vows as a little boy, really, that I would never understand certain aspects of the world of men and sports and this and armies and all of that, with your buddies. And I was a very solitary person. And one of the ways that I kind of compensated for my loss of physical agency and control in the world was through reading and thinking. And I got really deeply in touch with my internal life. And I described myself once as walking through the world with one eye looking out and one eye looking in. Mm-hmm. So when things came up over the spinal telephone, I just followed them. It's like I heard blues. I heard gospel music first, actually. There was this extraordinary black woman that raised me for 11 years. Her boyfriend was a gospel singer. And when I heard gospel music, nobody had to tell me that this was powerful. Nobody had to tell me that this was the greatest thing I had ever heard. I still listen to gospel every Sunday, but like old 50s gospels, you know, like Swan Silvertones and the Five Blind Boys and the Dixie Hummingbirds and Clara Ward. And so same thing when I heard, we had a family friend named Ralph Burton, who was a disc jockey in the 40s, and he had something like 8,078 records, all cataloged. And I went over to his crib. I had a crush on his daughter. And my dad gave me this reel-to-reel Webcore recorder. I was maybe 10 years old, so this would have been 51 or 52. And I went to Ralph's house, and I recorded 5 or 6 reels, just picking people whose names were interesting. But they turned out to be Mississippi John Hurt, Crippled Clarence Lofton, Mississippi Fred McDowell, Booker White, Mance Lipscomb, Furry Lewis, Lonnie Johnson. So by the time folk music broke a couple of years later, I was an expert in this stuff. And then I discovered Alan Lomax and the Big Sounds of the South series, and Shave Note Singers, and Parchman Farm convict chants, and man, these sounds were like indisputably true. And I wanted to learn about the lives that produced them and what these people were like. So I wasn't thinking hip schmip, I was thinking like, wow, I want a piece of this. You know, it was a kind of greed for the authentic.
Yes. You were also, and have always, it seems, been in search of new teachers and of new mentors, you know.
Yeah.
That may not be reinvention or self-transformation, but I also think that may be a bit unusual. I don't think most of us out here are constantly searching on that deep level. Maybe we are, and we just don't see it, but I mean, you recognized when a new teacher or a new mentor or a new opportunity to get close to somebody revealed itself, and it seems to me that you've spent a lifetime sort of synthesizing all of that information into a coalesced, coherent point of view.
You know, there's a great book I read once by a woman named Alice Miller, and it's called The Drama of the Gifted Child. And in this book, she posited that especially sensitive children, when they receive feedback from a parent that some aspect of them is unacceptable, you know, the parent just somehow withdraws love. They feel it. You know, it's maybe your parents can't stand to see jealousy or anger or aggression or meanness or whatever. That's such a traumatic instance to be forcibly separated from a parent like that the child splits off and they create another identity without that offending quality in it. But the problem is it's like a trick bag. It's a double bind, because you win back your parents' love for this new, shiny, chromed self, but it also reaffirms that your authentic self is not acceptable. And that's a disastrous revelation. So I lived in a family in which I had these really hyper-vigilant parents that were always kind of correcting me or behaving as if something about me was wrong. And you pick that up, you know, as an assumption about yourself. And when you grow up in a house where your parents are not reliable models, where it's not safe to be yourself, where an impulse or something is like really judged and harshly dealt with, well, you have to find out how to be. So you got to find people that know how to be. And if you like them, you say, well, wow, I like this about her. I like this about him. And on one level, they're just all reflections of characteristics. You couldn't see courage if you didn't know about courage. You couldn't see integrity if you didn't know about integrity. But you don't know it when you're young. So I think what you're describing in sort of glowing terms as if it was an act of ethical will on my part was actually coming from a hunger and a sense of loss and a sense of desperation that I didn't know who to be and how to be it and how to just have a life. So I started looking, and I never stopped until I kind of got to the place where I sort of saw through the surface of things and could just say, oh, this is who's been here all along. Oh, this is just awareness. Oh, well, that's cool. I can be that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But I'm 73, and it wasn't that long ago.
Reading your story reminded me of my own father's story. He had a complicated relationship with his father, and he lost his father when he was 26.
Uh-huh.
So much like you, his dad never...
I was 30.
You were older.
Yeah.
But in both cases, I think your fathers didn't live long enough to see kind of the...
That's right.
Maybe they saw the seeds planted, but they just really saw the wandering.
It's a poignant thing.
I have the opposite relationship. I'm still very close with my father.
It's so lovely. I know it is.
At the same time, I certainly wouldn't trade it for the world, but I look at the people that I know who suffered the same kind of absence of affection at home and then early loss, and I see that intense motivation and search and struggle that I guess is still unfamiliar to me. And I'm not talking about financial. I'm talking about the sort of awareness when you wake up in the morning that your parents love you and are thinking about you.
It's, in a funny way, it's harder to come to yourself with good parents. Because what are you going to do? They got goodness covered. They've staked it out, right?
Yep.
You don't want to be not that. It's a little easier when your dad's a bully or a drunk or something to say, I'm not that, and to claim a territory for yourself. It's a much more nuanced dance, I think, to come from a really great family. But from my perspective, I always envied those kids that did. I used to have a little friend named Colin Walcott who was a drummer. And, he knew at 10 that he was going to be a percussionist. And he just didn't waste his time.
Yeah.
He just didn't waste his time. That's what he was killed in a car crash when he was young, What was the name of the band? Orion, Oracle. It was a real famous band. Anyway, so I always admire my friend Dickie Van. Had two great parents who were doctors, and Dick went on. He was a Navy SEAL. He invented the underwater rebreather that allowed frogmen to not make bubbles and stuff. And these kids were just like going ahead on a path. I was flailing and trying this and trying that and falling off. And I saw him one day, and we were talking about, after we were long grown, we were talking about the old days. And I got thrown out of the school that I went to. And he sort of laughed and he said, well, yeah, you never did any work. And it stung a little bit because I realized he had no idea of what was going on in my house. And consequently, what was going on in my head that made it impossible to do work, So if I could have done it again with parents that would have allowed me to be who I was and nurtured that, and I would have taken it in a heartbeat, I think.
It's interesting that you say you didn't waste any time because, I was really struck by the fact that the thing for which you were probably best known, which is for acting, came much later in your life after you had done all of this incredible work, not only on yourself, but sort of in the world. Then you came to this thing that really didn't seem that you had been particularly motivated to look at for a long time.
It wasn't.
But there was a part of me that was thinking, maybe that effortlessness allowed you to be more comfortable in it or feel more fully formed when you really, in earnest, started acting and film acting.
When we were diggers, the diggers in San Francisco did everything anonymously. And that created problems for young, talented, ambitious men.
Were you a young, talented, ambitious man?
Yeah, I was. I knew I was talented,
yeah.
and I knew, and I had that kind of urge for glory or recognition or fame, and we deliberately suppressed it. But you know, the Grateful Dead could be in my house or with me and my friends, and they could hear the hippest, cutting-edge conversation on the planet. And then the next day it might appear in a Jerry Garcia interview. And I would be frosted, you know, and then I would say...
That he literally took the words out of your mouth, yeah.
Yeah, and then I would say, but wait a minute. He didn't take a vow of anonymity. I did. He's just doing his thing, you know. He's just a friend of mine. What the hell? So it was a very difficult leap for me to decide to go into acting and to deal in the realm of money and commodifying myself and putting myself up for sale. And it took a lot of struggle. But luckily I had been sitting Zazen and practicing Zen Buddhism for a few years. And what got me able to do it was, I thought, well, okay, if the world is truly interdependent and interpenetrating, mutually supportive, that means that every situation I'm ever going to encounter is going to be an admixture of positive and negative valences. There is no pure place to stand outside of it. So that means that if I consistently pick the most enlightened options that I'm offered, I'm doing the work. And that allowed me to say, oh, I get it. It's not the content of the movie that matters. It's the way you make the movie. So I was always the first cat on the set. I never threw a temper tantrum. I never argued with people. I treated the little production assistants exactly the same as I treated the directors or the co-stars. That was my practice. I just needed to make a living. I had a daughter. I didn't have any money. I'd never made more than $2,500 a year, ever. And I didn't really like acting because I wasn't ever trained. And had I been young enough and not had to earn a living, I would have gone to England and studied at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts and tried to be one of those brilliant English actors who I think, with the Russians, are the best in the world. But I had to earn a living. And I call it humping donkeys in Tijuana, you know. Wash the beast, darling, I'm coming. So I did it, but I never felt like I was a superlatively gifted actor. I thought I did my best. I thought I was okay, maybe more talented than the average. But I was never going to be Marlon Brando or Sean Penn or Johnny Depp or, you know, Daniel Day-Lewis. It just wasn't going to happen. And it stings to know that. It stings to know that, let's say, even though I was the social peer of any of those guys, you know, Sean Penn was a great friend of mine. I was married in his house, and I'm certainly his social peer, but I'm not his peer in the world of Hollywood. And you know, people can't help but let you know it. A-listers like to hang out with A-listers. And it's just, I've seen it 100 times, not only for myself, but for other people. So it always smarted a little bit. And finally I thought, when my kids were out of school, I don't need to do this anymore. I don't need to make this kind of money. I'd rather live on my pension and write my books where I can control the quality myself. Because I'll go toe-to-toe with any writer on the planet. I can't go toe-to-toe with any actor. Because in that same way that I described splitting off before, I survived my childhood by splitting off my feelings. And even though I know that today, it still doesn't give me ready access to them. It takes me a long time to sometimes identify what I'm actually feeling. And for an actor, you don't even have to be smart, but you have to know what you're feeling. And you have to be able to create a little playpen in your imagination to run around that will generate the feelings that you need for that scene. And I'm not so skilled at that.
But you do have, and had for a long time, exposure to like almost every kind of American and many foreign archetypes, you know? You had really seen what these men and women looked like and talked like and smelled like Eastern European Jewish immigrants and New York hustlers and, you know, New England folkies and jazzers and, you know, communists and organized. I mean, even just before you're 17, Texas lawmen and,
it's true.
So when I think so many people are looking at the description on the page and they kind of have to reach into maybe whatever the kind of pre-existing pop icons are, like that they've already seen on television or movie, or that they have to kind of draw for themselves. You had really seen the real guys.
Yeah, that's the irony of my life, actually. That this impossible father that I just couldn't have a life around. It was just suffocating. He just delivered all these fantastic people into my life. All the mentors in this book, except for Gary Snyder and Nino Cerruti. I think all of them, and Carney Hodge on the State Arts Council, all of them were delivered to me by my dad. It's kind of astounding, because he was a very remarkable man. He just wasn't a good dad, but he was a compassionate, complicated, brilliant guy. He went to MIT when he was 15. He could run 6-digit numbers in his head faster than I could type them into a calculator. He played chess every week with Edward Lasker, a grandmaster. And he just didn't understand my mind at all, my left-handed artist's brain. He didn't get it. He thought maybe I was stupid. I don't know. It frightened him that the world was going to eat me. And so he thought it was his job to toughen me up. And the sorrow of it is that he never knew what a sweet little creative, sweet kid I was. Or maybe he did, but I never got to understand that he saw that. I never got the feeling that the way I was okay. It was always, watch what you're going, hurry up. Well, you got shit for brains. I mean, really, just till the last time we spoke, when he came to visit me on a commune and blew me over by saying that I was a better man than he was, and that he saw this raggedy-ass, dirt-poor, hard-scrabble commune. I said, Dad, this isn't even a dress rehearsal. He said, I know, but you share what you have and you take care of each other.
What did you mean when you said this isn't even a dress rehearsal?
Well, he came out on this crazy stormy weekend, and we didn't have electricity. We were in a 1-story farmhouse built in the early 20th century, and we had a 5-gallon hot water heater, kerosene lamps, and the Hells Angels were visiting, and the kids, everyone was muddy and wet and damp, and my dad shows up and my mom with a case of scotch and 100 Seconals, barbiturates, and there he is, kids are crawling over my mom, people are offering her joints. She's saying, no, darling, I have my own, thank you. And it was like crazy. I was really embarrassed. It just looked like squalor to me, really squalor. My dad was calling the Hells Angels faggots. I thought I was going to die in a fight defending him. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting down late at night, and he raised his head and he said, you're a better man than I am, son. And he sort of got it. And I asked him, in my first book, I tell this speech, I never forgot it. I asked him, well, Jesus, how about a little advice, a little help? And he said, capitalism is dying of its own internal contradictions. I ought to know. I'm one of them. He said, you think it's going to take 5 years, but it's going to take 50 or 60. And the sons of bitches running it, they don't care about you. They don't care about their children or their grandchildren. They've paid their dues. They just want to get out with what's theirs. And he said, keep your head down, take care of your family, hang in for the long haul, and don't let them crush you, because there are huge historical forces at work, and they'll just crush you. And that was about, 45 years ago. Wasn't 50 yet.
Close, though.
And I haven't seen anything that he said that was wrong.
Well, it's interesting. It sounds like the majority of that advice you took with you. That's what I was going to ask you, if you see that becoming a reality. And it seems like you suggest that you do.
Well, we don't jump off of a building. because we have an experience of gravity and we trust the scientists who've told us. And there's a lot of stuff we don't do. We don't drink water out of the Love Canal because we trust the scientists. But when the scientists' implications of their studies conflict with our opportunities to create wealth, we impugn them. So the bloody planet is on fire. And we're still making 400 horsepower cars. We're running big commercials bragging that the United States is independent in oil. Wow! It's like the captain of the Titanic running out and saying, the pool's open, the water's great, you know? So, I mean, it's such a psychotic, sociopathic ignoring of facts that have the implication to end civilization. If, as James Hansen of NASA, you know, the guys who put a man on the moon and brought him back, it's not Hippie Eddie. If those guys are correct, and the sea level's going to rise 50 feet, just imagine every coast on the planet. And imagine the mass migrations of people as underground aquifers are flooded by salt water and there's no fresh water. And hundreds of thousands of people have to move. There's no government boundary or border or society that will be able to resist that. And when you want to see what a lawless world looks like, look at Yemen, look at Libya, look at Iraq, look at Syria. That's what we're looking at. It's the same species. They're not some defective form of germ over there. It's us. And the same fissures will come through our culture, the same mafias, the same racial disputes, the same ancient enmities. And people are rushing toward it at an accelerated pace. And the only wisdom I can claim after 40 years of meditating is that I see it clearly, and I'll be an honest witness of it. But, I mean, it's like a mass delusion.
In which we're living right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there were some Swedish scientists that did the math and did the numbers, and they said that if everybody on Earth used like 2,000 kilowatts a day of energy, I think it was kilowatts, or I'm not sure about but the number 2,000 was correct, that there'd be enough for everybody, and that would mean that the people in Bangladesh could actually multiply their energy requirements by 6. They could get that much more to come up to like a tolerable human level. But the Americans are using about 12. 12, right? That means we have to cut our energy use by 6 times so that other people can live and enjoy the fruits of a healthy life. Do you see all those kids out there with iPads and iPods and fascist rock concerts and, you know, loudspeakers and laser displays just burning up energy like it costs nobody anything? Do you see those people doing that?
No, obviously not.
I don't.
It's funny that you say fascist rock concerts, you know, I mean...
I don't mean the performers are fascists. I mean they're the same kind of displays that the fascists used to do. Huge mass events that are put on like Roman circuses. They require all the power of the state and the manufacturing complex of the world, all the petroleum, all the everything to raise money to save a seal. Play in your living room.
Right. And to a certain degree, that's how you started acting. I mean, you started acting on the street, taking it to the street, putting it in front of people, in the sort of proverbial living room of the city.
Yeah. And if we weren't good, we didn't get any money. If we weren't funny, if we didn't entertain people, and if we didn't express the sentiments that they were perceiving. It's the only difference between an artist and anybody else. When I was young, I used to think the artist is the antenna of the race, which conveniently translated into, I know what's going on and you don't. But when I thought about it a little farther, I thought, wait a minute. If people don't know what's going on, how can they be laughing at my jokes?
Sure.
A joke is the surest sign that people are seeing the world the way you are, right? So the difference then between an artist and everybody else is that the artist can invent forms of expressing it, but everybody knows it. And then when you put a form in front of them, they go, yeah, that's it. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
So we're all part of the same big stew.
Mm-hmm. You've been doing a lot of voiceover work, and it seems like on the one hand it's the most natural thing. We were talking before we sat down and pressed record about how when you do Ken Burns documentaries, you don't like to read the script before, or read it out loud at least before
I never read it at all.
You don't know what you're going to say.
I don't know what I'm going to say.
And that's because...
Just like your dad or you don't know what you're going to play until it's one, right? 1, 2, 3, and 1. Yeah. So I do that because first thought, first feeling, best, freshest, clearest, that's what translates to the audience. And I happen to be able to read my ass off. I have chops. I've been playing scales of reading since I was 6 years old.
Well, that's exactly it. It seems like such an understated thing to do, and except for the fact that there is so much meaning and value that can be transmitted just in the way the thing is read.
Ken Burns is a hell of a writer. Let's not forget that. Ken Burns is the guy that amasses all the information. Beethoven wrote it down. Maybe I'm the first violinist, but I'm not the guy that wrote the score. And you got to keep that in perspective.
And that's coming from a writer.
Yeah. No, he's awesome, man. And he works with wonderful historians, and you can't imagine the amount of diligence and labor, because he's one of the most impeccable cats I've ever worked with. He does not miss a tick. He's got the ears of a musician.
Do you think that if you had sat down to read those same scripts 30 years ago, that you would have come to them with the same approach, or that it would feel the same? I mean, obviously your voice is different now, but that you would approach it in the same way, or did it require the work of the last part of your life to sort of come to terms with how you think about doing that kind of work, that voiceover work?
There's when I was younger, I used to do a lot of ads because it's big money. And once you get a little bit of notoriety, you fall into this celebrity voiceover bag where you try to guess, who is that? Oh, that's Gene Hackman. Oh, that's Donald Sutherland. Oh, that's Peter Coyote. But you're not really endorsing the product, so it's kind of cool. But, then the schools graduate younger art directors. And younger art directors go to work for the ad agencies, and I'm like grandpa, They want their own voices. They want those slacker voices, and they want those Gen X voices. And I can't do that. That's not legitimately who I am. So I've sort of fallen into the high IQ end of the pond. And I do a lot of documentaries. And Ken Burns is sort of the cream of them. And I don't do so many ads anymore.
You talk about doing ads. I've been sort of tiptoeing around bringing it up with you because, I might make my living writing music for ads.
Don't tiptoe. You got to make your living some way.
I was very embarrassed about it for a long time.
Yeah, it's a mistake.
And I didn't want to tell my musician friends and my artist friends, and I ended up telling a good friend of mine who I consider to be one of the great songwriter friends of mine, and he said to me, everything that you do, you have an opportunity to do it well and beautifully. So
not the content, it's the way you do it. That's how I became a film actor. We live in this mercantile world, and there is no pure place to stand outside of it. We thought there was in the counterculture, and it turned out to be horsepucky. There isn't. If you make a circle and you say, well, a human being is half light and half dark, most people think, wow, well, if I can just get rid of the dark, I'll just be this enlightened person. But you're not a circle anymore. You've taken half of it away. So the trick is to stay in the world as it is and manifest your values as best you possibly can. You will never be pure. A red-tailed hawk eating mice off the highway is not pure, but it's a red-tailed hawk and it's taking care of its babies, So it's a tough one, because the more ethical you are and the more analytical you are, you want to be straight, you want to be right. But you can't be right to the degree that, if you try to be better than everybody that you live with, you're going to wind up being worse.
I think that maybe there's a way to find the balance, and do the work that you think is really significant and valuable without having to go all the way off the grid. I mean, you for a time you went like totally off the grid.
Oh yeah, I was off every kind of grid. I was off my own grid. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was taking so much dope and just ignoring my health and my stability and my sanity and everything. Oop. See, this is... Well, I'll have to talk to them later, sorry.
Oh, no problem.
You know who that was playing? David Fathead Newman.
Oh, yeah.
Ray Charles's tenor player.
I should know that.
It's a song called Hard Times.
You really identify with musicians and as a musician, that you have a kind of a musical heart in a lot of ways.
It's really funny. My grandfather was a painter, and he was a disciple of Jacob Lipschitz, and he did started as a sign painter for United Cigar Stores when he couldn't make a living as an artist. But he became something of a Rembrandt expert. He had all of these copies of Rembrandts in his apartment. He knew the linen he used. He knew the paints he ground. He was not allowed to do anything full size. And he used to take me to the museum when I was a kid, and he'd have a 4x5 card with a 50-cent piece sized hole cut out of it. And he'd go up to Caravaggio or a Tintoretto or a Rembrandt, and he'd lay it over it. And he'd say, "You see how he made the eyelid recede? Do you see how he changed the color tone there? Do you see how he put a highlight here to show you there was a bone?" And he just sort of drilled me on how painters solve problems. And if he'd left me alone when I was drawing my cowboys and Indians and wouldn't say to me, "Don't erase, Rembrandt never erased." Well, it didn't look like the kind of Indian I wanted, Grandpa.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I had this great training, so I can look at any painting today and I can talk to the artist. I know just what he was trying to do on the canvas. And it's kind of like that with musicians. Mm-hmm. But I can't paint and I can't play to the level of my understanding of what I know. So what I learned from being around musicians was that life can be improvised. And I learned to be comfortable with that and free with that. But actually, in my deepest self, I actually feel that musicians are a kind of refined and superior breed, that they've worked out a way to short-circuit language. And I've had experiences on my meditation pillow where language fell away, and it was just beyond concept, beyond names, beyond the contradictions of grammar and syntax. Things were just what they were. And all the musicians I know are slightly loopy in this great wiggy way of being okay with that, being slightly at odds with the world that's ruled by language and the laws of grammar and syntax. And as a wordsmith, I'm pretty fluid with language, but it requires special effort for me to get to those places where I'm free of it. And I can't do it on an instrument, but I can sure tell the difference between chicken shit and chicken salad. Mm-hmm. I know who can and who can't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think language can be a tool, but it can be a weapon, and it can also, it can be
prison.
A prison, yeah. That's right.
Without a doubt. You get a word for something, and the next thing you know, if you're not careful, you're actually considering that word a thing. And you're talking about that word as if it's a concrete entity. And then pretty soon you're dealing with ideas and concepts about these concrete entities, and you forget to realize that you're 3 symbolic levels back. A tree, the word tree does not describe the phenomenon of a tree. Mm-hmm. And it certainly doesn't describe all the consequent interpenetrations of the roots holding the soil, of taking carbon dioxide and making oxygen and making homes for bugs and animals and all this, cooling the water with the salmon breeding, all of that stuff, none of that is in the word tree. Mm-hmm. And so, it's easy to cut down a tree because you don't have access to that other holistic observation where you just look at it in its suchness and its wholeness and its integration with the rest of the world. So I saw musicians when I was young, 10 years old, hardly formed, and I saw grown-ups operating and playing on a plane that was, I recognized as true. And if God had been just and loving, like they say, I would have had big ears like they do. But that's not my gift,
I forgot. I had seen it years ago, and I totally forgot that you made this movie in Spain with one of my favorite directors, with Pedro Almodovar.
Yeah.
Was that a strange story? Is that a strange experience?
Let's just say it was not happy.
Really?
Yeah, not happy.
Okay.
I learned to speak Spanish for that film.
Yeah.
I put out extraordinary effort. I went to Spain 3 months early, lived by myself in an apartment, studying. And I never took a rest during that film. I was working every spare minute with a coach, like learning where you could breathe in a sentence. You know what I mean? It really was a totally foreign language. But he wasn't super supportive, and at the end of the day, he dubbed me, even though you can see I'm speaking Spanish in the whole film. So it's not something that I remember all that well, although I think he's a really gifted filmmaker. He just didn't like me.
That was exactly the question I was going to ask you. I think actually the context is a little deeper because Spain has a huge tradition of dubbing. They don't subtitle anything. Not that they would have needed to subtitle you, but that guy's voice that they used to dub you with, it's like I recognize that voice. I lived in Spain,
No, I didn't know that.
You would go and see the same guy played Woody Allen, Jack Nicholson.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And it was like you recognized the guy's voice, and he became this familiar voice that was going to take you through the story.
But all the critics busted him.
It was terrible.
They said, "You dubbed that guy? You dubbed Peter Coyote? Come on, man." Because I was already famous for my voice at that time.
Yeah.
And I had offered, I said, come on, Pedro, I'll buy the print, but send my voice to America, And no, we didn't do so well.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it's all right.
That was during a period, though, where you were making a lot of foreign films.
I still make foreign films. I've made 6 French films. I speak pretty good French. I speak a lot better Spanish now than I did then. And it just shows you how far I got to go to get a gig.
Mm-hmm. I think at the end of the day, that's where a lot of the real, authentic American popular culture of the 20th century is surviving.
It's where the grown-ups live. Really. Look at all my friends. Teddy Wilson, great piano player, had a son named Stephen Wilson, who lives in France, works as a chauffeur. He's a jazz drummer. Mm-hmm. He's a good pal of mine. And I've met so many American black people who just got tired of walking around in a draft all the time, with a chill. And you can walk down the streets of Europe, and from 200 yards away, I can tell you a black American or a black African. It's so, every black American has somehow pimped his walk as a kind of reaction to, hostility or being ignored or not seen or something. And Africans don't. They grew up on a continent of black people. And man, I can't blame anybody for getting tired and wanting to be in a culture where you're appreciated. I'm a much bigger deal in France. It's nice to be over there and be treated like, someone of importance. Over here, I'm just an old Jew with an animal name. It's like, really?
There's not that many of you out there, I wouldn't say.
Shitbag in a suit. So I love living in Europe. They take care of their people. They send their kids to school for free. There's bookstores on every corner. I don't worry walking down the streets at night. It's pretty grown up.
It is grown up. It's true. Although I was thinking about this thing you said that one of your great friends and mentors, Nino Cerruti, said to you, which was that the significance of the European Union to him was that if it doesn't work out, that means that the only real international model of capitalism is America.
Yep. And that's a disaster.
But Europe is having a little bit of trouble right now.
Yeah, they are. Well, so are we.
Yes.
You know, there's a problem with capitalism, which is it's got to keep growing. And the only thing that does that in nature is cancer. So until we start to make some adjustments, I mean, in Europe, the wealthiest people decided that it was better for the culture if they put a little cap on conscious decision to try to make things work out better. And you can feel it. It's palpable.
Peter Coyote, thank you so much.
Thanks. It's good to see you, Leo.
Yeah, likewise.
There it is, Peter Coyote, an honest witness to what's happening. Again, if you liked what you heard, please go to third-story.com. You can hear all of the previous episodes. You can subscribe. You can leave a message. You can go to iTunes and rate it or leave a review as well. By the way, folks, May 30th at Barbès, I'm playing with my band. If you're in Brooklyn, stop by and say hello. It would be a pleasure to shake your hand.